Well, hello everyone and welcome to Downstream Dialogue. I'm Jeremy Campbell. This podcast has been around sharing information and knowledge around the amazing world of water, the impacts that water is creating to support lives and enhance the way that we do things around the world. But more importantly, today I'm joined by an amazing guest, and I'm really super thrilled to have Scott Rice with me. Scott is the Fisheries and Delivery and Framework Manager at Stonebury. He's an expert in all things rivers, ecology, fisheries, I think, and I'm looking forward to talking to Scott in a few moments. Before I just do that, a couple of things. I was doing a little bit of research about rivers, and I've been talking to Scott now for 12 months on and off about rivers and finding out how just amazing they actually are and how important they are to our environment. But there are 1,500 rivers in the UK. If we add sort of streams into that, there are probably more than 40,000 streams, I think, Scott.
Yeah, and also, Jeremy, did you know that there's 200 chalk streams globally, and 85% of those are in the UK?
Well, it's going to be a really amazing discussion because I just find this whole thing fascinating. Whether or not you're walking down London and looking at the iconic historic Thames, whether you're in Scotland looking at the Clyde, or whether you're going down looking at your local streams like I do in Deanwood, keeping rivers flowing is so essential. Scott, welcome. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you
Please,
for having me.
just tell us a little bit about what you do at Stonebury and what your role is.
Yep, so I'm the Fisheries and Maintenance Manager and Framework Manager for the Environment Agency Works at Stonebury. I've been involved in this type of work since 1998, where I started having completed a fisheries and worldwide aquaculture degree at Sparshot.
Do you want to tell our listeners what aquaculture is?
Aquaculture, so fish, shellfish, farming opportunities around the world. I did work experiences in Greece with bass and bream farming, up in Scotland on salmon farms, general fishery stuff, but aquaculture is, the farming of aquatic species such as fish and shellfish and seaweed.
I find this so amazing. Just thinking about that rivers again, 100 billion cubic litres of water passing through our systems. Can you just tell me something about, I've heard you talk to me about, is it non-invasive species or invasive species?
Non-native invasive
Non-native invasive
Yeah.
species. Can you say, what is that?
So, broadly speaking, a non-native species that's arrived in the UK, sometimes with other plants, particularly in aquatics, we have lots of species arise through the ornamental trade. So whether that's fish, shellfish, in particular aquatic weeds, things at the moment that are quite high profile would be Ludwigia, which is a creeping water primrose, and floating pennywort. And these are all non-native invasive species that will block and cause flood issues, and they're detrimental to our native species.
See, this is what, again, really interests me. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about eels shortly. So, folks listening out there, if you're interested in eels and want to know why they're such a protected species and they're so important to British waterways, we're going to come back onto that in a few moments. But, Scott, tell us, why is it important to keep our rivers flowing?
So it's everything. It's the lifeblood of everything, and it's the species that live in there, from the smallest organisms and algae. It's the precursor, and include that with the oceans. It's the precursor to all life on Earth. And that's probably quoting David Attenborough, but that's where it all started for me. So keeping the streams flowing, keeping the rivers flowing throughout the country. Some of them are man-made, some of them are natural, some of them require lots of management. And I suppose historically, we've seen a loss of flows, a loss of groundwater, and that's why we're incredibly passionate about helping our rivers and restoring water courses where we can.
What do you mean by loss of flows?
We talked about cubic meters of waters and flow. So if we, over the summer flows, you tend to see them drop down. And a lot of our work for things like on gauging stations, where we'll just be cleaning weirs and brushing and cleaning, so that those flow stations can accurately measure the flow going through. It's blatantly obvious when we're in flood conditions, and I know that they measure that as well. But during low flows, tiny bit of algae over a gauging weir can mean that someone downstream may not get approval for abstraction, or it sets the abstraction limits for water companies and the Environment Agency. Over the summer, we'll have really low flows, and that impacts on sediment deposition. So we'll have more sediment settling in areas, because there's no flow to keep it rolling and keep it suspended. So then more vegetation grows, and then we'll have a situation where that vegetation attracts more sediment, and then essentially your streams and rivers, it's a natural process, but they get smaller, and they adapt to the flow. So it's flow dynamics, hydrology, geomorphology type stuff that is, and I'm not a geomorphologist at all, but I'm just fascinated at how rivers move and redistribute those gravels and sediments, and how that affects where I'm a fisherman. So hang about where the fish like to hang about, and the vegetation grows, and and all of that needs to be maintained, and that tended to be a lot of the emphasis on the work that we've been doing.
I think that's really fascinating. It's also brilliant if you think about any of the listeners out there that are geomorphologists or the hydrologists, or they're interested in fish or habitat and species creation. What a great industry to actually come and get involved with, to utilize those skills for the benefit of our environment. So am I right in saying then that the water flows through our rivers? And does it go into reservoirs? Does it go back out to sea? What's the natural flow?
So I think, broadly speaking, for like chalk streams, the water goes down into the aquifer. It can take many years for it to reappear somewhere. But the catchments, some of it's very flashy. My recent time in sort of flood and coastal risk management with Stonbury, and looking at built up areas, a lot of that in and around, certainly the Midlands, there's a lot of concrete that makes it very flashy. We don't tend to see the surrounding land take up that rainfall, but if it lands in an urban area, it tends to hit quite hard, and it's on a concrete surface, and the emphasis seems to have been to get it into a channel and get it away. Whereas certainly in more rural areas like the levels, they were used for holding water, and but slowing the flows is another term that's used to try and store a bit of water, and slowly release it back into the environment, rather than hitting a concrete surface or hitting a roof, coming down, getting into a drain, and then just straight into a river, and then that slow, rather than it going down and going through the soil, and making its way into a river. When we've been inundated with rain, it's tended to be just get it gone as fast as possible, and then that's where we've had situations on the Severn where you have a high tide combined with high flows coming down the river, and that that can lead to flooding at certain stages of the tide. That can happen on all rivers.
So if we have those situations, you repair flood banks, don't you?
Yes.
Or river banks, I beg your pardon, to
embankments,
avoid. Yeah. Tell our listeners what I mean. Obviously, I can see why it's important, but what do you do? How do you repair a riverbank?
Yeah. So in general, embankments are man-made, and they protect properties behind that embankment, and the Environment Agency have invested money in those areas to protect those banks. And where there's a slightly low spot, you'll have the water flowing through those. And at the time, it's very obvious because you can see the water flowing through it. And they'll often, in an emergency, we'll be putting sandbags out to stop the water coming over the embankment, and over time it will flood that area. So in general, the embankment work that we've done, so we like to maintain embankments by keeping it in good order. So certainly the mowing and vegetation maintenance of it. So I'm thinking in the past where we, a river like the Severn, you need to be aware of things like burrowing vermin, any damage to flap valves where, they're not working properly or they're damaged. So lots of things like that. Just so if you can't see it, you can't maintain it and look after it. So looking after the vegetation, making sure there's no trees growing on it and no burrowing vermin, and that it's managed well looked after state. So over the summer, we'll be doing grass cutting and then looking after sort of trees and bushes and making sure that nothing's growing on. You'll have invasive species growing on that, so things potentially like Japanese knotweed or giant hogweed or Himalayan balsam is a good one on rivers locally. It's an invasive species that really really poor root structure that then leads to so it will overtake a piece of bank. It's very good at spreading its seeds. It's got the little seed pods that sort of pop open and broadcast the seed. It then grows. It outcompetes the native plants, and so there's no understory. There's no other cover other than the Himalayan balsam that will, because it's got this really, I say really poor root structure. That's part of the strategy for, when the floods come, it gets washed away, and then basically the soils and the increased erosion and the sediment back in the channel, and there's no other plants there to grow or to help protect the bank. And that's one of the things that we, when we're looking after embankments, that we'll try and to manage. So that's where some invasive species come into that management sort of process. Some of the other embankment work that we do is crest raising. So locally on the Yeo, the Tone, and the Parrot, we've done some crest raising activities where we will pull back the top zone. We were talking about the water flowing over. Some of the areas have been damaged by cattle. Some of the areas have been remarkably by dogs getting in and out. Some of it's just where it may have not been maintained well, or you could have a tree falling in. You could have burrowing vermin, and we know when water's passing through an embankment and where it shouldn't be, because it's often scoured, washed out, and that increased flow over the back of the bank removes all the vegetation and starts to carve into the soils. So what we've done is we've stripped it back with a machine. We mobilise the site, strip it back, and then we pack in clay. And often the agency will have a supply of clay somewhere on the levels, and we'll manage the delivery of that. And we'll dig out, pack in the new clay, compact it with a sheep's foot roller, and then in 100 mil layers, and we document all of that. And then we will put topsoil back on and redress it. And we've been putting fencing around it. Cattle on the levels are always trying to get in the fencing.
Yeah, I've seen this particular example with you, I think,
Yeah.
out in the field. So
you have, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds fascinating. Most listeners, I would guess, are like me, and we walk down these rivers and walk down these streams, and we just think about the beauty of it. We don't probably think about what rivers are doing, what the streams are doing to protect our watercourse, to protect our environment. From what you said, we're protecting species, we're protecting the water. But let me just turn a corner with our discussion. You talked to me about eel passes and fish passes. So for the uneducated like myself, what is an eel or a fish pass? Why do you need to put those into the watercourse?
Yeah, sure. So fish passes in general, and I'll include eels in this bit, is that the fish need to migrate, and they might migrate because there's better habitat. They might move around for spawning, feeding, and reproduction. So in general, a fish pass will be to overcome a difference in height or a weir or some type of structure. Could be man-made, could be natural. Most fish will be able to pass a boulder kind of structure, which is a little more natural. Eels can, they just need to be damp, and they'll find a way out and around. The fish in general, salmon will jump, and we've seen those. but all species need to be able to move around. Some of the differences between a fish pass and the differences you need for an eel, of which so around the southwest or everywhere, but in the southwest particular, we get a lot of a huge eel run on the sort of Somerset and Severn rivers. We get a lot of juvenile eels coming in from the southwest, and they're really small, and they need, to make. I'm thinking of local ones. They need to be able to make it up over these structures, and and there'll be a structure where you've got a tidal influence. So rather than the rivers emptying out or saltwater incursion, there'll be some kind of type of structure, and those structures need to have an eel pass, and it is law now. So and it's to help those eels that are spawn.
Am I right in saying that they spawn in the Saragossa Sea?
Yeah,
And then they somehow find their way back
yeah,
to the British Isles.
yeah. So
And then they spend 20, 30 years before they decide to go back.
yeah, and they're fascinating. So they will. I'll go down there. So the eels, they're catadromous, which means that they spawn in the sea, and then the juveniles come into fresh water to grow before migrating back to sea to spawn. So I think it's about 5,000 nautical miles down to the Sargasso Sea, and I think lots of other eels, American eels, are down there as well. It takes them a long time to get there, and there's lots of great stories about how, when do you leave? When do you leave to get to a party that's 5,000 nautical miles away? You don't want to be early, you don't want to be late, and you need to go and meet your friends there, because this is the reason that
This is the moment.
This is your moment
This is
to
your
catch
moment.
up with everyone and procreate.
Yeah.
And it must happen. And I've had friends that have done research in Ascension, and they track the eels, and you need quite a big eel to put a tracking device on, but a transmitter, and they see them go off the continental shelf, and I mean they're fascinating. The eels they're getting it from all sides. They get eaten by whales and dolphins and things like that, and some of those transponders end up doing odd things, and it's because they've been
Under
eaten.
the Arctic by some whales.
They get passed through quite quick, but the body temperature changes because it's now in a mammal. Their diurnal fluctuations, and whether they're at the surface or they're deep, is very different from what you might see in a normal eel sort of activity. But then they're in a mammal, and then they get passed through.
Just to turn a corner then. So now we've got rivers. We need to keep them flowing. We need to keep them clean. Two further questions. First one is, why is it important to desilt a river? You guys do that a lot, don't you? One of the key roles you play.
So desilt or degravel.
It's removing suspended dirt.
Yeah. So it's to maintain conveyance. So you've got your channel, and it needs to take X amount of cubic meters of water. That's the conveyance. And to maintain conveyance, we need to keep the vegetation in check. And the vegetation is probably there because of, it's on the banks, and we need that there to protect the banks and the embankments. But occasionally you'll have things around. Well, if we look at the Parrot and Tone and rivers like that, where you've got a tidal influence, the flat valves won't work when they're covered in sediment.
Yeah.
So, and they could be small flat valves, or they could be the size of a car. If they're not maintained and looked after, that sediment will block. And then when you've got surface water runoff that you need to get into the channel, and the flat valves don't operate properly, the result would be some flooding.
So you guys then, so to keep that water flowing so that the water can flow back into the seas and back into the water cycle, ready to be reused again.
Yeah.
You clean these rivers? What?
Yeah.
You do that, don't you? You drain them out, don't you? And you protect the fish.
Yeah. So in situations like that, where, for example, down at Exeter, where we remove some fish from the Exwick channel system, and it's a flood relief channel with a sideway that comes off the River Ex. The Environment Agency were carrying out the the civils, the maintenance on the side pond. And before they did that, we removed all the fish. So there was lots of eels, lots of lamprey. There was marine fish in there, so little flounder and stuff that you might find in the estuary, which is only a few miles away. When you get a high tide, they've made their way up through the river, and during flooding incidences, they get caught in these little ponds. So in that job in Exeter was, basically that was a silt removal to keep the capacity and attenuation in that pool, should it be needed, and also to check for, again, just like an embankment, the concrete structures need to be maintained, and look at joints and flat valves and make sure that system has an eel pass on it. That there's an opportunity to do some work on that as well.
I mean, there's so much more than probably the ordinary person would really appreciate that goes into keeping our rivers flowing. I think our listeners will probably appreciate that there is so much to do. So Scott, obviously there's been a lot of press and bad publicity around pollution in rivers. I want to ask you what that pollution is, what's causing that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, lots of different types of pollution. The types that we're seeing when we're out and about on the rivers might be particularly sort of sediment type. So it could be anything in the river that really shouldn't be there. So agricultural pollution, so different farming practices where you get runoff from maybe a maize stubble field. So they've taken the crop off, and then there's nothing there to hold the soils together, and that can, during heavy rain, can then flow into the rivers, and then you obviously get like a plume of sediment and potentially excess nutrient. At the same time, you've got those high flows, combined storm sewage overflow systems,
which is really relevant in the news moment.
It is, and potentially I feel that maybe at Stonbury we're stuck between the two. I mean, my main client would be the Environment Agency, but I know we also work for the water companies, and I feel that there's some dialogue there that maybe we can help with, and making sure that we're understanding why and how and the repercussions of this. And essentially, if it's sewage, it's excess nutrient, which in the immediate short term will deoxygenate the water, and fish will struggle and die because of it. Longer term, there's excess plant vegetation growth, let alone other water quality parameters that are going to be impacted by it, for human health.
Yeah, and this is where I guess this Cunliffe report's coming, isn't it? To try and bring the Environment Agency closer to the Drinking Water Inspectorate, closer to the water companies, closer to all the bodies that you're talking about now, which hopefully will give us a more holistic solution to river pollution control that benefits fishermen, benefits the fish, benefits habitat as well.
Yeah, certainly. And so, I mean, I think it's incumbent on everyone that we report it. And when we have our little safety moments, when we're talking with our colleagues at the Environment Agency, waste, fly tipping. People often like to chuck stuff off a bridge, and we're often removing that. And that could be for fridges, could be beds, it could be mattresses, all kinds of stuff that really shouldn't be dumped anywhere other than in the right place, which would be some sort of landfill or refuse collection recycling facility. But because of the regulations, they are what they are, people take the shortcut and just dump it in a lay-by. But it doesn't take much to cause a blockage. Just discarded paddling pool we've found, and stuff like that, plastic sheeting, and some of it might be, say, innocent, where it's been blown around in the wind, but it doesn't take much for that to get caught on a trash screen, and then a few leaves and sticks, and before you know it, you've got a man-made material that's ended up in there and causing us problems and flooding. Yeah. I think and that's one of the things that I've enjoyed doing on the current AOMR framework, is that part of our community.
AOMR, what's that?
Asset operation, maintenance and response.
That's with the Environment Agency.
With the Environment Agency, yeah. So,
and a really important framework, as I understand, for doing this kind of work.
Yeah, so we're on it, other places in the country as well, but for the southwest, we're on the lot 1, which is civils, and 2, the MEIC, and 3, Lot 3 is the vegetation management. But as part of our community engagement, and the framework assurances, we like to be able to demonstrate and are required to fulfill community and social engagement. So, and that's one of the things that we will do and record. We're not even prompted to do it. It's just kind of, I think it's incumbent on everyone, whether I take a scout pack out and do a litter pick on the beach, and we provide them with some gloves and litter pickers and ice cream at the end of the day, or having the team that have, rather than being idle and sat in a mess room, they're proactive and do something beneficial for the company, the environment agency, but more importantly, rivers and the local community. And it's not everyone that can go and do that. It's, they've got the tickets and the expertise and the training and the equipment to go and do it. But yeah, that's one of the bits that I've enjoyed.
Scott, it's been really fascinating to spend a little time with you and ask you some of these questions. I feel what you're saying. I understand the importance of rivers, keeping them flowing, keeping them pollution free, not just for all the species and the local habitats that are created within our water cycle, but obviously for water quality purposes as well. If there's one thing you could change or improve, what might that be?
I think some of the invasive species are a massive challenge. They cost a lot of money. Generally, there's for vegetation and invasive plants, aquatic species in particular. I think biocontrol is probably the way that we need to go, and just getting those useful. But it takes a lot of resources, and it's very expensive to get all of those things approved. And the guys that are doing that kind of work with the Environment Agency and others are doing great work, but it's a long, drawn out process to get in a biocontrol or a species that can, a little bit like the little lady who swallowed a fly.
Yeah.
We need to find things like a rust or a weevil from its native range that doesn't impact Farmer John's carrots, but will control Japanese knotweed or giant hogweed or Himalayan balsam. So I think that would be, if you could come up with a really good biocontrol for some of these invasive species, and they're out there, they just, whether we can actually get them approved and out there and dealing with it. But I think also just looking at the horizon and making sure that there's always something new that's going to arrive. And whether it's fish or there's lots of shellfish, and they impact all of us. So the water companies and the biosecurity side of it is key if we're working in both sectors, and we need to make sure we're not adding to that problem.
So just turning the final corner in our discussion, Scott, perhaps you could just explain to the listeners a little bit about what you're doing around flood prevention.
Yeah, so flood prevention at the moment, we've mentioned the crest raising, so we keep the water in the channel as much as possible and repairing the low spots. Right now, we're doing some vegetation management on the Bristol Avon areas, rivers, so Trowbridge, Bradford Pond Avon. So looking at removing limbs that could potentially fall or come down during flood conditions and cause blockages and potential flooding around structures. So like with bridges, particularly things like, say, Bradford Pond Avon, just we're not really worried about the bits of ivy hanging on a wall, although if it's on a flood wall, we need to be able to, like a flood bank, you need to be able to see that it's in good state, good condition. So we will cut that back and remove it from the channel so that we can have a condition report. Like I say, we're not really interested about taking all the vegetation off unless it's on a structure of which a flood wall would be. So lots of clearance. Again, bits of rubbish, any debris, anything that's likely to cause a blockage.
So we talked about this earlier today. You were mentioning about working with the Armed Forces Covenant, and you were talking about some of the and ex-armed forces that you've been working with. Perhaps we can just share.
Yeah.
Promise.
Okay.
I
So
promise.
just only yesterday we were working in Bradford upon Avon, and the local flood warden came round, which they like to see what we're doing and keep an eye on us and make sure that they're getting as much done as possible by the Environment Agency.
All right,
And
so.
and this guy was a retired brigadier from the army, and and that just prompted me to say, oh, here's my colleague. He used to be in the forces, and before I knew it, they were all talking about their army days. And I just dropped in that we do the Armed Forces Covenant, and like to work closely with the ex-forces charities and that. And it's just a nice opportunity to, again, one of those things that we can do. Sort of that's community and social engagement.
It's been brilliant speaking to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I do hope you'll come again. I'd love to talk about eels in the future. I think that's a fascinating subject that I'm sure plenty of our listeners would like to listen to. If you've enjoyed listening to Downstream Dialogue, then again, please press the button at the bottom of the screen and subscribe to our channel. We'll be delighted to have you keeping listening to us, and we hope to see you on our next show. So other than that, Scott Rice, guru and fisheries expert, appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.